Thanks, everyone. Um, this is the story about efforts to eradicate little fire ants on Maui. And it may be familiar to several of you. I looked through the participants and recognized many of you. And I know that several of you have seen this in some form or another. Um, so I apologize for anything that is familiar to you. I've added some new things to it and included a statewide update at the end. I know I saw in there that Chuck is
Joined
there.
the meeting.
Chuck is my mentor for PowerPoint jokes. So if any of these fall flat, you can blame them on Chuck. So let's let's start here. Doesn't seem to be advancing. Here we go. All right. Little fire ants. They are a terrible pest in Hawaii. They are tiny, tiny little ants, so small that if they are on your feet, you may not know that they were ants if you're looking down at your feet. This is a queen surrounded by her workers. They go by many common names. In Hawaii, we call them little fire ants. In Australia, they're known as electric ants. They are considered one of the world's worst invaders, top 100 worst invasive species. They are arboreal, meaning that they live in trees and they also live on the ground. They form super colonies. So they spread out and just one queen after another, nest after nest, and they form these gigantic, sprawling, many acres super colonies. Everything inside gets pushed out, outcompeted or killed. That's most other invertebrates and many animals. They sting. The stings create persistent rashes. They're itchy, sometimes for days and weeks. On some people, everybody reacts differently. And they are just devastating to the environment and agriculture and quality of life. Very costly pest. So this is what some of the stings look like, the rashes, and this is what AI thinks it looks like to have a picnic with little fire ants. Of course, it's not quite correct. They don't fly in Hawaii, but they also will sting pets and cause this. And you can't imagine this little pup here being stung, going blind by little fire ants. They will sting all sorts of other animals, game animals, feral animals, agricultural animals, and especially pets when they go to their food. The ants, little fire ants, are also attracted to dog food, cat food, and so pets will, be eating, and the ants will be there and get on their face and sting them in the eyes and cause this cloudiness. And again, another AI generated image of very cute animals going blind from fire ant stings. They also will ranch pest insects. And that's it. They're actually moving these pest insects around. For example, aphids have a sugary secretion that the ants can eat. And so they will protect the aphids and move them around plants. And they literally are like ranching those pest insects. And this is what it looks like when you zoom in. They wear those cowboy hats. So like I said, they're devastating to the ecosystem. Really, really bad for the Hawaiian native ecosystem. And actually, the Death Star operator was a little fire ant, and destroyed worlds. And they banded together with Thoron, who was the embodiment of evil, and they were even seen at the January 6th riot. So fire ants' native range is South America, Central America, and they have been spreading out around the world. They came to Hawaii from Florida, along with all sorts of other nasty things that come from Florida, Ron DeSantis. And in Hawaii, they were first detected on the Big Island in 1999. They were also detected that year on Kauai. And one big difference was on Kauai, it was um, it was at, I believe, a private residence. Um, whereas, and Tiffany, I know you're in the audience here, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the Big Island, they were first detected at a nursery, and it had already likely spread around the Hilo and Puna district. Whereas on Kauai, it was a different situation, and I'll go into a little more detail about what the current status of those locations are towards the end of this. They were then detected in Maui in 2009, Oahu in 2013, and there was one section on Lanai shortly after that, Oahu in 2014. They have never been detected on Molokai or Kaho'olawe or Niihau, of course. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about on Maui. They, like I said, they were detected on the Big Island at a nursery and got rapidly out of control. And you can see here what has happened to the Big Island. They came to Maui in 2009, and that's them getting on a boat right there. But since 2009, there have been 19 incursions on Maui. And I say incursions because not all of them really ended up as major infestations. Some of them, in some cases, were trace forwards that Department of Ag conducted, where they found little fire ants in material in another place, like Oahu or Kauai, for example. They traced back and they traced forward. They traced back to the Big Island, where a lot of little fire ants have been coming from, and figured out what nursery, for example, had shipped things, and then traced forward to the places that they went to, and found on Maui in some cases, like a shipment of hapu'u logs, and those were quickly taken care of at a big box store, for example, and did not become a large infestation. But that's where we come in on Maui, the fire ant removal team, and what we do is first thing you have to do is survey the area and to understand the size and scope of the infestation. It's really important that you very clearly delineate the boundary of that infestation before you start doing treatments. And so to survey for little fire ants, you take a little vial with peanut butter in it, and you go place it out in the environment in a shady place, and you can leave it there for an hour, is usually what we do, an hour or more, and come back. You pick up that vial, and little fire ants are really attracted to peanut butter, so they'll be in there. You put a cap on that vial, you take a GPS point, and then you go back to a lab where Monty Tudor Long is our ant ID expert. He looks through a microscope to identify little fire ants. Since they are so small, there are other tiny little fire ants that it's really nearly impossible to positively ID them with your naked eye. And so he goes through each one of those samples and assigns the species found in that vial, and then we are able to make a map. We try to place vials every 15 feet or 5 meters. That's roughly the same right there, and in spacing throughout the infested area. And as you can imagine, for a large infestation, that can take a long time. It often takes us several days or a week to survey our entire site. And here's an example of what that looks like. If you were to place a sample in the middle of this this field here, you would be sampling an area of roughly 5 meters in all directions, since that's what we believe is their foraging range. So any nests that were within that 5 meters would possibly have ants go out and forage to our little peanut butter vial. And so each one of those nests has a range of 5 meters or more. Again, these are averages and expert opinions, and so of course an ant could travel much further than that. But we consider an area infested 10 meters from any positive detection to encompass beyond where we think the ants might be foraging from. And when we do treatments, we treat an area of 20 meters from any positive ID, so that we are treating beyond what we think is the edge of the infestation, because our methodology is imperfect and we need to compensate for it by treating a greater area, in case, of course, something was missed in our original survey work. We can then take this treatment zone and grid it out. We are now using hexagonal grids, not these square ones. But this is an example of how we might create a grid to help us ensure that we place enough samples evenly throughout the infested area to be very thorough in our survey work. When we do treatments, we have a number of options available to us. And in fact, this is a little bit old, this slide, but there are other types of products available besides just these here. There's two main forms that we use for treatment. There are granules, and those are typically like a cornmeal that is soaked in oil and a active ingredient. And so you can use a blower to spread those around. You can use a seed spreader to spread them around, but those are good for open, flat areas, and but they usually cannot be applied in any type of wet environment. The other tool we have is a gel bait, and you can see in this animation here, it's this sort of goopy pancake batter-like substance that we can mix a toxicant into, or we can mix an insect growth regulator. And that is something we use frequently, brand name Tango, but the active ingredient is S-methoprene, and it functions as a birth control. It is not toxic to the ants. But if you feed it to them regularly, every 6 weeks is the schedule that we use. These methodologies were developed by Hawaii Ant Lab. If you feed it to them every 6 weeks, it will function as a birth control. The queen will not be able to reproduce, and eventually the workers will die off of old age, and then the queens, they live longer than the workers. They will need to forage for themselves. They put themselves in danger, and they will also die of old age and or neglect, because they have no workers to tend to them. And so that's a really low impact method. You can use it on crops. So oftentimes in situations where we cannot use toxic baits, we will have to rely on just the insect growth regulator alone, which works. It just takes a little longer to more treatments, typically we find, than using a combination of the two. This is a slide showing relative toxicities of some of the active ingredients that we use. But the stuff that we're working with are nothing is a restricted use pesticide, and none of these are really nasty pesticides. We use phones or tablets, some sort of smart device with GPS enabled in the field. We were able to take those maps that I described earlier, put them onto our GPS or tablet, and then go out in the field and rely on this well-mapped guidance to make sure that we are doing thorough and complete work. When we're doing our treatments, typically the ideal methodology, if you can use it, is to treat for 6 months with the insect growth regulator. This is every 6 weeks, and then switch over to a toxic treatment for another 6 months. So we do 1 year of treatment. That is the original prescription regimen of treatment. The idea being that when you switch to the toxic, the queens are all on 6 months of birth control, and so the workers are aging and the queens are unable to reproduce, and so you come in with this toxic treatment and it's like a 1-2 punch and it knocks them out. At the end of that year, of course, we go in, we do a very thorough survey of the entire site, and if there are any ants remaining, which often there are, we call this a hotspot treatment, and we will then change the map down to where the ants still remain, treat those hotspots, survey, treat, survey, treat, survey until there are no more ants remaining. Then that's when we would we'd shift into the monitoring phase. So there's no more treatments, and we are just monitoring to make sure that we really did get rid of all of the little fire ants in the area. And so that monitoring we continue to do for 5 years after the last little fire ant is discovered. And so at the end of those 5 years is when we would declare victory and say that that location was eradicated. So we don't use the E word lightly. And in practice, this is what it would look like. This is actually a site on Maui in Kapalua area. And so this was the original delimitation where we went out and mapped the whole area. The dark blue dots show where we did not find little fire ants, and the red dots are where we did find little fire ants. And so if you zoom in and we look at just where the little fire ants are, and we're not interested in those other blue points, the infested area would look something like this, and the treatment zone would be a little bit larger. Of course, we don't treat into the beach into the water or below the water line, but this is what the data directed us to do. So we would take this 20-meter treatment zone, and we would put it on our GPS tablet, and we would go out and we would start treating. And the goal is to color in that whole area. And you can see here that this whole area was not colored in this first treatment. And that was because we did not have this guidance system in place at this time, but we did shortly afterwards. And so these are roughly the treatments that were done over time. Halfway through this, we conducted a mid-treatment survey just to get a grasp on how things were going. And as you can see, all the way already at halfway in here, the ants are greatly reduced. There was just one positive sample collected, but we would continue the treatments on through the year. And then here is an example of those hexagonal units that we currently are using, and this is the survey. A lot more samples were placed, and more ants were found. But at the end of this cycle, we then reduce the treatment zone down to where the ants remain, and we continue on with those treatments. And so this is what that looks like. So at the end of that, it is then time to do another survey. And unfortunately, we have to survey the entire site every time we do these monitoring surveys. And so we did. And fortunately, we did because we found, you can see one red point there. So this is illustrating how the hotspot treatment works. We continue to refine the treatment zone, go back to treating, and then and so on and so on until there are no little fire ants left. And we've completed 5 years of monitoring, and that's when we call the site eradicated. At that point, we no longer work on that site. So on Maui 8, as I said, there was 19 locations. Currently, 7 of those locations are considered eradicated. So that means that we have not found little fire ants at those locations for over 5 years. And so the green dots in this map are no longer being worked on. There are 4 sites that are currently in a monitoring phase. That means that we're not finding little fire ants, but we're continuing to survey there. And once we hit that 5-year mark, they will shift into the eradicated category. So there's currently 8 active sites on Maui. All of them are greatly reduced in size, like I showed just previous, how the shrink down to the hotspot phase. So they are not the size that they were originally. And in fact, I'll show you some acres here in a minute. But on the dots on this map are sized differently to represent their size of those infestations. And there's one very large dot, and that is the blue dot on the east side of Maui there. And I will go into detail about that. But that was the Nihiku infestation. And the acreage, the treatment zone and acreage far eclipses any other site here on Maui. And so that was 175 acres that we were treating with helicopter. And I'm going to give you a bunch of details on that. But as you can see, the next largest sites we have, this graph may need to be updated as some of our sites, the total acreage expands if a hotspot is found on an edge. But I think the largest acreage, that total acreage outside of Nihiku, is 11 acres on Maui. So these are all manageable by ground. This graph shows sites in management. That's a little misleading because those sites that are green are eradicated. So this is the number of sites up to 19. I'm not showing Nihiku, that very large one, on this graph. It would add to the blue bars in 2023 now, but this is the number of sites by type by quarter. So if you look in 2014, there were like 3 sites in monitoring phase. Sites can go from a monitoring phase back to a treatment phase. So it can be like a year, or say like 2 years, and you come back and suddenly you find LFA. That's rare, but that does happen. Oftentimes what does happen is the area that we were managing for so long, we survey, and along the edge, suddenly we find something to realize that during our management, little fire ants got out from under us and started a new small infestation on the side. We call that, we refer to that as a breach. And that has happened at, I want to say 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 of our sites. This graph here is the same thing, except for that it is acres in management. And you can see that currently in fourth quarter of 2023, we have less than 20 acres in active treatment. We've got, it looks like, I think it's like 10 or so acres of active treatment. The rest of our acres are in a monitoring phase. Essentially, we're looking for ants, but a very reduced amount. And again, this is not including the 175 acres of the Nahiku infestation. So that is what I'm going to talk about now. That site is not like the others. It is much larger, and in 2014, when it was discovered, it was realized that our typical ground strategy was not going to be adequate for this site. So we needed to do something different, and was decided to use a helicopter to treat a very rugged, wet, forested area on Maui. So the site is, like I said, wet, forested. Oh, I'm supposed to play. Sorry. There we go. Little demonstration of what the area looked like. So this is pretty rugged terrain, very wet. The vegetation is extremely dense in some areas, difficult to move through, and there was no way that we were going to be able to do these treatments using our typical ground strategy. This is what the site looked like before we began treatment. This is a composite data of surveys that happened over several years. So it's not a snapshot in time like we try to get for our monitoring surveys. At this site, you can see the green blobs. Those are cow bush, which is a really dense thicket. It looks like a jungle gym. It's impenetrable sometimes. You can crawl under it or you can climb over it, but you can't go through it. It's really difficult to work in. And so we had some major acreages covered in this really difficult vegetation. We think that the original infested material was introduced at a residence at the, this is about 1,000-foot elevation, Mauka of the Hana Highway, and there is a stream or waterway that runs all the way through down to the sea cliffs at the ocean, and that's what created this very linear looking infested area. Typically, when we come across an infestation, it is more or less round as the little fire ants slowly spread out from the center. They usually create these round infestations unless there's some sort of barrier running through the infestation. Sometimes a road can be a barrier. It's not a perfect barrier. If there's a tree that reaches over, they can get across that pretty easily, but they won't walk out onto the hot pavement, it seems. So that will change the shape of an infestation. And in this case, the stream was actually moving them. And so that is another way that the shape of an infestation can be influenced. So we had to do this aerial work. There was a lot of things that had to be put in place ahead of time. We needed to get a permit to do the work, and the Hawaii Ant Lab did that for us. They were very close collaborators on all of the work we've done here on Maui. They a special local needs permit to be able to use this product called Alticid, which is the exact same insect growth regulator that I referred to earlier. So it's birth control. It's very low impact on the environment. We also did the Fish and Wildlife Service came in, and Dan Polhemus surveyed for threatened and endangered species in the area. Particularly, there is a native damselfly that was known to be in the region. However, when we went and looked in the streams, they're loaded with mosquito fish, and any stream with mosquito fish is not habitat for this damselfly. They're mutually exclusive, so it was deemed not in the area. And then we also had to figure out how we were going to use this product, strap it to a helicopter, and treat the area. Fortunately, we have a fair amount of experience. My slide's not advancing. Here we go. Sorry. Okay. We have at Maui Invasive Species Committee quite a bit of experience using helicopters to treat plants, and so what we did is we adapted an existing system, which was, you can see on the helicopter, there is a spray rig attached to the bottom, to the belly, on a belly hook, and a big long line that hangs down 60 or so feet to a spray ball, very heavy spray ball on the bottom with 5 nozzles that sprays in 5 different directions. And so we had to build this out and measure the flow rate and measure the swath that it covered. And that way we were able to calculate our ground speed to achieve the application rate that we wanted. And so here is what that infestation looked like, and we needed to create a treatment zone. So this was the treatment zone that we drew around the infested area, and we went out and began treatment. And this is what the data looks like, the raw data coming from the helicopter. There is the helicopter pilot and then a spotter sitting next to him with that tablet or phone with the data on it. And when the pilot starts spraying, we hit a little button that says start. And when he stops, then we hit a little button that says stop. And when you clean the data up and clip out all those tails, when the pilot has to continually go back and refill those tanks held, depending on the system, we updated that system around 30 to 40 gallons of product at a time. And so he would fly out, and it would take about 15 minutes or so to empty that tank, and you have to go back and then refill it and then head back out. And this operation took more or less all day long to do. Each time we did it every 6 weeks. And so this, we spent more time than just a year doing these treatments. As I mentioned earlier, when you're using these insect growth regulators as the only form of the active ingredient instead of a toxic ingredient, which we could not use in this situation because of the waterways, we spent a longer time doing our treatment. So this is the first round of treatments, 13 over 19 months. We started in October of 2019. And this is what that data looks like, piled up on itself. This is what it looks like with spaghetti and meatballs. But if you take those lines and you for them 11 meters to make that 22-meter swath is what we measured. You can create polygons representing the area that was treated. And if you take all those polygons and you squish them together, you can create a heat map. And this is the heat map that shows in black areas that were treated 13 times and in white areas that were treated once. And so you can see here, this is pretty good coverage. There are some gaps, particularly at the Mauka area. There's that residence there that we were asked to steer clear, wide berth. And then you can also see where the Hana Highway runs through the center. We were trying not to spray vehicles along the Hana Highway, so there's a little bit lighter treatment in there, but overall, we were very pleased with the results here. And so, again, showing you what the infestation looked like before we started. And this was many different surveys over time. So a lot of these are surveys in the same place. So it wasn't approached systematically in a grid system. But as you can see, there are many, many samples containing little fire ants. This data set, this is like 8,000 data points, nearly 8,000 data points. And so we had to assess, we had to redo this survey again. And so to find out if it was working, we attempted to survey the 175 acres. This effort began in 2021, and we had over 25 crew members working on it for several weeks. And we had those GPS guided grids on our data devices to make sure that we covered as much ground as thoroughly as we could. There's all sorts of pitfalls and things. This was difficult work. Our crew was soaking wet and crawling through grass, the overhead grass, and climbing down cliffs into streams and out of streams. And our samples were being stolen by mongoose and eaten by pigs. And there was cattle in the area. People lost radios. People cracked their tablets. Trucks got stuck. It was a zoo, and we've done this 3 times now. And this is again an AI generated image depicting what that work was like. It got close, but so here we go. This was the first survey that we conducted after those 19 treatments, and we found little fire ants, but it was greatly reduced from what it looked like before. This was delightful and surprising to me. I expected it to be not quite as clear of little fire ants as we found it. So here in this image, you can see that it looks like we found little fire ants outside of our treatment zone, and that is the case. But to do a quick analysis on just within the treated area, we found less than 0.5% of our samples containing little fire ants in the area that we treated. So this was really great news for us. And if you zoom in and look at the location that we found little fire ants, here you can see that the bulk of the samples we collected with little fire ants were just outside of our treatment zone or right near the edge of the treatment zone. So we weren't done at that time. This is 2021. But here I'm showing now, I've added orange dots to the map. These orange dots are other ant species. This treatment will affect other ant species if they're attracted to our bait. Ants, there's over 60 species of ants in Hawaii, all of them non-native. We weren't concerned about these non-target impacts because generally it's only going to be ants that are attracted to our bait. But as you can see in this map here, that outside of the treatment zone, there appear to be a lot more ants than inside the treatment zone, because anything inside of our treatment zone would have also been affected. Some of the ant species that we were collecting in the treatment zone really weren't attracted to our bait, but were sometimes being collected in our samples just because they happened to be there. All right, pest here. So overall, about 8% of the samples we collected contained other ants. But you can look at this in more detail. So the heat map, which shows 13 treatments in black and 1 treatment in white, I can extract that number of treatments at each point. And what that looks like is this. So locations that were treated 0 times had 50% of those samples come back containing an ant species of some sort. So outside of our treatment zone, you can say every other sample we collect had ants in it. Not little fire ants, but other ants. And then places that were treated 13 times had far fewer. So we can take this graph and we can bin it into a simpler graphic here. And so you can see a very clear trend that the more treatments, the fewer ants. So locations that we found ants needed to, we needed to continue treating those locations. We also have those large areas of howe bush that were really difficult to survey. And so while we were doing aerial treatments, we decided that those areas would continue to be treated as well, since we weren't able to get really good information inside of those areas. So we went back to work in our new treatment zone, and we did another 7 treatments over 8.5 months in just those new areas. So this is kind of like a hotspot sort of treatment. And what that, it came time to go back and do another survey, and what that looked like was this. Again, we found ants in the same area that we had before. And we found ants, other ant species throughout the area as well. If you zoom in and again look at the places that we did find ants, you see that we've collected only 5 samples containing little fire ants, and the one sample that had the most had 31 ants in it, and that's not very many. And the other samples had very few. So what this indicates to us is that the little fire ants are on their way out. This is not representative of a thriving infestation. When you get samples with a few ants in them, that typically means, especially in the interior of a treated area, that the little fire ants are on their way out and may not need more treatments. They may be not laying eggs, and the workers are aging and getting old and dying off. So that's what these sort of densities indicate to us. So in this survey, we found that there was actually more ants found, just a little bit more. The previous survey was about 8%. Now we're up to almost 10%. And even fewer little fire ants than before. So we decided to continue treating, and we did 4 more aerial treatments over 4 months. At that point, of course, we were very excited to see how it went. So it wasn't quite time for that annual large full site survey. And so we wanted to go in and look just at those locations that we had found little fire ants. And in the one spot, we didn't find any. And in the other spot, we found 1 sample containing 3 little fire ants. And this was great news to us, and we decided that we would just wait it out. In fact, we went back again, and we could not relocate that location where we found little fire ants. We couldn't detect any more little fire ants there. That was the second time we went back, and so we ceased aerial treatments. The last treatment was in February of this year, 2023. And then this recent October, we went back and we did the full site survey. And at that point in time, we did not detect any little fire ants. So this was the moment we were waiting for. This is a huge victory. And so this site, which was once Maui's largest infestation, is now in the monitoring phase. So, woo. Looking at other ant species during that survey, what we expected to see, and it looks like we are seeing, is that since we stopped treating the larger area, other ant species have started to move in. And we've now jumped up to 23% of our samples containing other ant species. And so it's really gratifying to be able to predict what we think is happening, is going to happen, and then have the data show that exactly as we're understanding what's happening, the mechanics of the treatment is backed up by the data that we collect. So currently, we are unable to detect little fire ants in Nahiku. And if we do find them again, we expect that to be a small localized area, and it may be treatable by ground at that point. So we don't expect to use the helicopter again. If we do find little fire ants in a location that is like inside of the how, or that is under very large canopy, we may decide that we need to use the helicopter again. But at this point in time, that is not the expectation. And so just a little bit of context here. This, there are other people treating ants with helicopters around the world, or aerial treatments. Oftentimes these are not published, and so it's hard to be definitive here. But there was a really good paper by Ben Hoffman out of Australia reviewing eradications, and so there were 72 aerial efforts in his analysis, and all of these were using granules. So granules, like I described in the beginning, they're fairly easy to use from a helicopter or airplane. You have hoppers that release the granules as you fly. However, they only work in dry areas without water. And these are often toxic treatments. And so in the situation in Hawaii, there's actually far fewer locations where you can use a granular treatment like this, because we have a wet environment and a lot of water. And so as far as we understand, there's nobody elsewhere has ever attempted a treatment of this nature using gel bait, using this methodology. And so what we've done here is novel. Nobody else has done this. And so this is a world first, and we're very proud of that. So as promised, I'm going to talk a little bit more about little fire ants elsewhere in the state. And so I'll start with on Kauai. And I know Tiffany is in the audience, so go ahead and correct me if I say anything wrong. But the current situation on Kauai is there are 5 active infestations. They have 1 eradicated site, and there's another site that is monitoring. 2 of these sites are fairly large. They are, I can't remember the exact numbers that Tiffany gave me, but like 30 to 40 acres in size. So those are smaller than the Nahiku site on Maui, but much larger than any of the other sites that we have tackled on Maui. I know that they are hoping to begin treatment on 2 of these sites soon. Now, the situation on Oahu is very different. They currently have 33 active sites. They have a different color scheme here, yellow instead of blue. They've got 9 sites in monitoring and 5 sites that have been eradicated. Unfortunately for Oahu, right now, most of these active sites have been discovered in the last couple of years. The first found on Oahu in 2013, and only in the last couple of years have many of these cropped up. So suddenly it's seeming to be headed towards out of control. And I'm not going to comment a whole lot on this, but Oahu needs action now if they are going to try and live without little fire ants. And that is unfortunate, and it is a symptom of funding, where on Maui, we have had adequate funding from our county to do the work that we need. And unfortunately on Oahu, they have had far less funding for this project. The funding comes from different sources, and like I said, on Maui, our county has been extremely supportive, and Oahu, I think they need a lot more staff than they have now, and sustained funding to turn this situation around. And then the Big Island, I'm not going to talk about, because the Big Island situation is far out of control. The people on the Big Island that live in Hilo and Puna and some of these heavily infested areas, they are treating their own properties at their own expense, and they will be doing this every 6 weeks forever so that they can enjoy their own backyard. And on the Big Island, schools have to treat their playgrounds, the parks shut down every 6 weeks so that they can do treatments around state facilities, and farms have to treat for little fire ants because they can't get people to come work if they have an active infestation and they're trying to pick fruit trees, for example. So all these farms are treating, and again, this is at the expense of the homeowners or the business owners, and it's very costly. There are some economic analyses that put costs of control and damages into billions of dollars, and it's much more economical to adequately fund a control program up front than it is to pay the damages in the back. So with that, the success in Nahiku demonstrates that these large sites in rugged, wet terrain can be eradicated with proper funding. And there are some people in positions of power that think that the fight has been lost and that we should live with little fire ants. We should just learn to live with them. And I don't agree with that. I think that what we have shown here on Maui is that, again, with adequate funding, these ants can be defeated if done in time. So that's my message to you, and thank you for everybody, and the other ISCs for sharing their data, and Hawaii Ant Lab for being out there and figuring this stuff out, and developing the techniques that we used and refined here on Maui, and able to protect Maui for now from little fire ants. And that's it.
Thank you, Brooke.